This is a man's world. This is a man's world. Ooh.
Have you ever been investigated by your parents, friends, or maybe a lover? Questioned under suspicion that you may have done something wrong? Does it look or feel like they're trying to squeeze that lemonade of guilt out of you? If that is so, we wish you well. Imagine where a law enforcement officer takes their place and investigates you under suspicion that you committed a crime. Concerning, isn't it? I feel you. But don't you worry, since all of us are given the rights and constitutional safeguards of persons under custodial investigation. What is custodial investigation? Custodial investigation is defined as any questioning by law enforcement officers after a person has been taken into custody or otherwise deprived of his freedom of action in any significant way. Custodial investigation begins as soon as the investigation stops to be a general questioning into an unsolved crime. Instead, it is aimed to the suspect who has been taken into custody and to whom the police would direct the questioning, which tends to extract incriminating statements. Here, there is a presumption that one is suspected to having committed a crime, and that the investigator tries to obtain any information or confession from him. When a person is under custodial investigation, he is entitled to the full armor of protections provided under the Constitution. Such protections are manifested in familiar phrases seemingly recognizable to us all. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand the rights I have just read to you? With these rights in mind, do you want to know more about it?
Anyone who has watched police or courtroom novelty dramas has heard the statement, "You have the right to remain silent." The warning is recited by police officers before interrogating suspects and is a direct outcome of Miranda versus Arizona, one of the most well-known and controversial rulings in U.S. Supreme Court history. The Miranda Doctrine means that prior to any questioning during the custodial investigation, the person must be warned that he has the right to remain silent and that any statement he gives may be used as evidence against him, and that he has the right to the presence of an attorney, either retained or appointed. The defendant may waive the effectuation of these rights provided the waiver is made voluntarily, knowingly, and intelligently. The Miranda Doctrine originated from the 1966 case of Miranda versus Arizona, where the U.S. Supreme Court established the rules to protect a criminal defendant's privilege against self-incrimination from the pressures arising during a custodial investigation by the police. Thus, to provide practical safeguards for the practical reinforcement of the right against compulsory self-incrimination, the court held that the prosecution may not use statements, whether exculpatory or inculpatory, stemming from custodial interrogation of the defendant unless it demonstrates the use of procedural safeguards effective to secure the privilege against self-incrimination. As explained in Miranda, the need for counsel in order to protect the privilege against self-incrimination exists for the poor and the rich. While authorities are not required to relieve the accused of his poverty, they have the obligation not to take advantage of indigence in the administration of justice. In order to fully apprise a person interrogated of the extent of his rights under this system, then, it is necessary to warn him not only that he has the right to consult with an attorney, but also that if he is indigent, a lawyer will be appointed to represent him. The Constitution, specifically Section 12, Article 3, even adds the more stringent requirement that the waiver must be in writing and made in the presence of counsel.
What are the rights under custodial investigation? Section 12, Article 3 of the 1987 Constitution mandates that any person under investigation for the commission of an offense shall have the right to be informed of his right to remain silent and to have competent and independent counsel, preferably of his own choice. If the person cannot afford the services of counsel, he must be provided with one. These rights cannot be waived except in writing and in the presence of counsel. No torture, force, violence, threat, intimidation, or any other means which vitiate the free will shall be used against him. Secret detention, places, solitary, incommunicado, or other similar forms of detention are prohibited. Any confession or admission obtained in violation of these or Section 17 hereof shall be inadmissible in evidence. The law shall provide for penal and civil sanctions for violations of this section, as well as compensation to and rehabilitation of victims of torture or similar practices and their families. What are the rights of a person during custodial investigation? First, the right to be informed of these rights. For example, the reading of the Miranda Doctrine for custodial rights by police during his arrest. This carries the correlative obligation on the part of the investigator to explain and contemplates effective communication, which results in the subject understanding what is conveyed. Second, the right to remain silent and to be reminded that anything he says can and will be used against him. This refers not only to verbal confessions but also to acts. However, mechanical acts that does not require the use of intelligence, such as providing DNA samples or to answers to general questions, are not protected under this right. Third, the right to an attorney or to counsel, preferably of his own choice. If not, one will be provided for him. This right is absolute and applies even if the accused himself is a lawyer. Fourth, right against torture, force, violence, threat, intimidation, or any other means which vitiate the free will of the person. And lastly, right against secret detention, places, solitary, incommunicado, or other similar forms of detention. Any confession or admission obtained from the person arrested in violation of these rights are inadmissible in evidence and cannot be used against said person. This is called the exclusionary rule. That is, it is excluded from the evidence to be considered by the court during trial. Such confession or admission is tainted and must be suppressed under the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine. Do rights of a suspect during custodial investigation attach as soon as he is invited to the police station? The answer is yes. The practice of issuing an invitation to a person who is investigated in connection with an offense he is suspected to have committed is part of a custodial investigation. As such, the rights of a person under Section 12, Article 3 attach. However, the rights of a suspect during custodial investigation do not generally attach in the following situation. First, police line-up or during process of identification. Second, spontaneous statements not elicited through questioning but given in an ordinary manner or spur-of-the-moment statements. They are considered as part of res justi. Third, volunteered statements. Fourth, extrajudicial admission or to the prosecutor or a private person, media personnel, or TV interview. And lastly, investigation made by a citizen or private security officer.
Let us further explore a crucial topic in the realm of law, the right to counsel. The right to counsel refers to an individual's constitutional right to legal representation when facing criminal charges. It is but an essential safeguard that ensures fairness and protects the accused. But when does the right to counsel attach? It was mentioned in Gamboa v. Cruz that The right to counsel attaches upon the start of an investigation. That is, when an investigating officer starts to ask questions to elicit information and or confession or admissions from the respondent or the accused. At such point or stage, the person being interrogated must be assisted by counsel to avoid the pernicious practice of extorting false and coerced admission or confessions from the lips of the person undergoing interrogation for the commission of an offense. But what is meant by the right to counsel? Any person under investigation must, among other things, be assisted by counsel. The Supreme Court has consistently held that no custodial investigation shall be conducted unless it is in the presence of a counsel engaged by the person arrested or by any person on his behalf or appointed by the court upon petition either of the detainee himself or anyone in his behalf, and that, while the right may be waived, the waiver shall not be valid unless made in writing and in the presence of a counsel. The right to counsel in the Philippines guarantees that individuals facing legal charges have access to legal representation regardless of their financial circumstances. It is but a fundamental aspect of our justice system, upholding the principles of fairness and equal protection under the law.
Now, I want to bring back the discussions to the origin of Miranda rights. I will relate to you who Miranda really is and why his rights matter, not only to the accused of today, but to every single person. The case of Miranda versus Arizona. This case arises from the unjust interrogation of Ernesto Miranda, a Mexican immigrant living in Phoenix, Arizona, who was accused of kidnapping, rape, and armed robbery. During his detention, he was questioned by law enforcement authorities by means of intimidation, coercion, and underhand tactics. As a consequence, he ended up making an indirect confession which ultimately led to his conviction, as he was uninformed and was misled by the investigators. This prompted to an investigation where the court deemed it necessary to emphasize the constitutional rights to legal representation and against self-incrimination. The court states that in the administration of criminal law, the government should be the first and foremost example of how to implement, interpret, and execute the letter of the law. If the government becomes a lawbreaker, how could it expect its citizens to follow the same? It invites every man to become a law unto himself. It invites anarchy. They even placed limitations on the interrogation process of the accused that do not and is not meant to interfere with the system of law enforcement to ensure that the rights of every single person is not prejudiced. Hence, the Miranda rights, which are read to every single accused before interrogation, becomes adamant and absolutely necessary.
An extrajudicial confession is a statement made by a person accused of a crime outside the court, usually to a local enforcement authority. In the Philippines, the admissibility of such confession is governed by specific rule and legal principles. But when is an extrajudicial confession admissible? The voluntariness of an extrajudicial confession is determined by several factors. It is admissible when it is first, voluntary, second, made with the assistance of counsel, third, in writing, and lastly, expressed. Viewers, remember that an extrajudicial confession may be deemed inadmissible if it was obtained through torture, threats, or any form of coercion, rendering the statement of the accused unreliable and involuntary. What are the examples of mechanical acts that are not protected by the right to remain silent? First, paraffin test. Second, the DNA test. Third, examination of physical body. Fourth, fingerprinting. Fifth, being asked to step on the footprint to compare foot size. And lastly, the urine sample. What are not considered as mechanical acts? First, the handwriting. Second, initials on marked money. Third, the signing of inventory receipts in search warrant. And lastly, the reenactment. While the mechanical acts themselves are not protected by the right to remain silent, there may be limitations or exceptions based on the specific circumstances of the case, such as when the act could lead to self-incrimination or violates the individual rights.
The right to counsel is a fundamental right that ensures individuals have access to legal representation during criminal proceedings. However, in certain situations, individuals may choose to waive this right subject to specific legal requirements and safeguards in the Philippines. What constitutes a valid waiver of the right to counsel? The waiver of the right to counsel provided for stricter requirements compared to its American counterpart and is valid only when it is made voluntarily, in writing, and with the presence of counsel. In the Philippines, a waiver of the right to counsel requires the following conditions. The waiver must be made voluntarily, knowingly, and intelligently by the accused, and they must possess a full understanding of their rights, the consequences of waiving counsel, and the nature of charges against them. However, it is important to note that a waiver may be deemed invalid if it was obtained through coercion, duress, or any form of undue influence. Additionally, the court has a duty to ensure that the waiver was made voluntarily and intelligently without infringing upon the accused's rights. Now, when is the right to remain silent waived? The right to remain silent is waived when the declaration of accused acknowledging guilt is made to the police desk officer after the crime was committed. Such spontaneous acknowledgement of guilt to the police desk officer may be given in evidence against him as part of the res gestae. The right to remain silent can be waived expressly or impliedly. Express waiver occurs when an individual explicitly and unequivocally states their intention to waive the rights, usually through a verbal or written statement. Implied waiver, on the other hand, occurs when an individual's conduct demonstrates a clear and voluntary choice to forgo the right to remain silent.
Thank you all for joining us today in exploring the important topic of custodial rights in the Philippines. We have discussed the legal principles and considerations surrounding the rights of individuals in custody.
Remember, the custodial rights play a vital role in ensuring the fair treatment and protection of individuals during their interactions with law enforcement. It is essential to be aware of these rights to safeguard our liberties and maintain the integrity of our justice system.
By understanding custodial rights, we can effectively navigate interactions with law enforcement, protect ourselves and our loved ones, and promote a society that upholds justice and respect for individual rights.
If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out. Remember, knowledge is power, and together we can empower ourselves and others to assert our custodial rights with confidence.
Thank you again for watching, and until next time,
Stay informed and stay empowered.